Chapter 36. Cam. Mr. Foster pushed the large barn door open, leaving the second of the double-door configuration closed. Once his visitors were through the opening, he shut and locked it by sliding a length of 2x4 across both doors. When he'd secured them, Mr. Foster turned and strode deeper into the barn. There were no lights, but enough sunshine shone through a row of upper windows to light the interior well enough to see. The barn lacked the smell of livestock, and Cam guessed it hadn't served its intended purpose for many years. There was grass-cutting equipment, along with tools and fuel cans, but the stalls were all open and empty. The floor was concrete and appeared to be swept and kept spotless as they followed the older man across the main open area of the barn toward a walled-off shop area. The shop was closed off from the rest of the barn by a single door, the only access point to the room. Cam watched as Mr. Foster unlocked the door, then held it as Cam and Darian entered. He grabbed a screwdriver from a workbench and ambled to a fall wall where another bench ran the width of the room. The visitors watched as the old man inserted the tool into a screw head on the top of the bench and backed the screw out to the halfway point. He did the same with 3 more screws, then pinched one of them between a thumb and index finger and pulled up, plucking a quarter of the bench's top off. Inside the exposed interior of the bench was a myriad of what looked like radio equipment. Mr. Foster laid the screwdriver on the still intact part of the bench and leaned over the hole, his hands supporting his hunched body on the front of his thighs. After a moment, he reached in and withdrew a radio that looked like something designed to be mounted versus carried. Mr. Foster handed Cam the radio, giving him a wordless gesture toward the work table. Cam took the piece of gear and placed it carefully on the work table just as their host handed Darian even more equipment.
"I'm careful with this stuff. Don't know if these damn foreigners can triangulate me or not,"
he griped as he pulled out a mess of tangled wires. The last thing he pulled from the bench's opening was a long coil of extension cord. Once everything was laid out on the work table, he began unraveling the extension cord and then dragged the male end back out of the workshop. Cam and Darian followed him back into the main area of the barn and watched him remove an old, rusty tarp from a small Honda generator. With more than a little difficulty, he knelt next to it and began tinkering with the little machine. He pulled off a side plate to reveal a portion of the wiring harness, which he immediately went to work on. "Does that thing work?" Cam asked.
"It will in a minute. I make sure nothing works or is hidden in case those bastards start a door-to-door campaign," he answered without looking up from the generator.
Cam huffed out a little laugh at that. He realized the older one got, the less they were apt to trust anyone. He guessed at some point a person lived enough years to have witnessed humanity's true capacity for wrongdoing. Not everyone was a moral compass-lacking scoundrel, but there were enough around to make the old man cautious in his endeavors to communicate with others all over the country and probably the world. Mr. Foster finished with the generator and returned to the workshop without starting the Honda. He moved to the work table and began connecting various cables to the radio before plugging it into a surge-protected power strip. Next, he connected the power strip to the extension cord and then stood back to admire his handiwork.
"Now for the antenna."
He grabbed a large glass jar filled with what looked like tangled speaker wire.
"That there," he said, pointing to the radio, "is a Yasu FT-817, capable of reaching other operators all around the globe, depending on the weather and a few other variables. I worked up a gal out of Colorado a few days back, and they're having a hell of a time, same as here."
"You're able to talk to people in other parts of the country?" Cam demanded.
"I can, and have,"
Mr. Foster answered, giving him a bit of a side-eye over his tone.
"I've talked to a lot of people from all over the country, and it's bad everywhere."
"Tennessee? Have you talked to anyone in Tennessee?" Mr. Foster nodded.
"I have. There's a sort of prepper network out there. I've heard quite a bit of rag-chew from that group, and they have people all over the place. The gal from Colorado says they've been hit with missile or bombing strikes on a bunch of targets in the area she's in."
"What about Tennessee?" Cam pressured.
Guy named Dan out that way says lots of looting and military movement in the skies. He seems like he might have holed up somewhere away from it all, though. Sort of laying low until the worst blows over. Hard to say for sure, though.
Do you know where he's at in Tennessee?
Gatlinburg, or close to that area.
Cam paused, thinking about that. Home was a few hours from Gatlinburg, nearer to Nashville, which was a large city and probably in the middle of ripping itself to shreds right about now. Was there any other news? Cam finally asked. Mr. Foster screwed his face up in thought, then held a finger up.
The Air Force Reserve Network nationwide was broadcasting in the open. No encryption. It was a canned recording telling American people the country was under siege by a foreign invader and to be strong. Lots of rah-rah stuff like that. I can't remember exactly, and they gave no specific information. I check it occasionally, and if they are broadcasting, it's the same message over and over.
Anything from around here, like Santa Rosa or Sonoma or places real close by? Cam queried, hoping to glean a little intel before heading into battle.
Nah, nothing that close. Problem is power for these radios. If you didn't have a power source protected against the type of pulse that caused this, then you're dead in the water. Eventually, people might figure out a power source, but right now, there are precious few who have radios up and running.
Aren't you worried about these guys triangulating you? Cam asked, now wondering if being here it was a good idea after broaching the subject of radio signal triangulation. The KPA could respond in a number of very unpleasant ways. One way would be to bomb the entire property. Another would be to send troops to search for the offending equipment. Cam didn't figure Mr. and Mrs. Foster would last long during a good old-fashioned North Korean interrogation. I would be careful how long you transmit, Cam warned.
I mostly do a lot of listening, son. Way out here, we haven't seen much except what flies over the house, so I don't have a lot to talk about.
Please don't ever mention us, Cam begged, suddenly feeling very vulnerable.
Wouldn't dream of it,
Mr. Foster assured him. You going to fire this radio up now? Darian asked, speaking for the first time. Mr. Foster wagged his head emphatically.
Nah, I just wanted to show you two that what I'm telling you is true. I'm speaking with people from around the country, and yes, America is at war.
Would you mind if we stopped in from time to time for information dumps? Cam asked.
Not at all,
Mr. Foster said, scratching at his ear.
Say, what are you two up to with all the firepower?
When Darian didn't respond, Cam spoke up. My wife and kids were taken a couple of days ago. I intend on getting them back. Mr. Foster looked genuinely shocked at hearing that news.
Taken where?
Probably a detention center at the fairgrounds in Santa Rosa, Cam said, his face turning grim after speaking of his family's dire predicament. Mr. Foster turned to Darian.
Does your father know what you're up to?
Darian's mouth twisted to one side, and he slowly shook his head. Mr. Foster gave Darian a disapproving look.
You can't just go running around carrying a gun. These guys are liable to take a shot at you.
Cam muttered, too late for that speech. Mr. Foster's gaze jumped back to Cam and then over to Darian.
Too late? Why too late?
Concern laced his tone. Darian stared down for a second before raising his gaze to meet the old man's eyes, which were glassy and showed signs of yellowing around the edges from age. Because we're at war, sir. I've killed some of their people, and they killed 2 guys I was with. Mr. Foster deflated at the news and took 2 stilted steps back. He sank down onto a stool in front of the work table.
So, it's come to this, has it?
The words were more a statement than a question. They've killed 3 of us, actually, Cam added. Then they took my family. They murdered the man who was driving them to my parents' place.
So, you two are going up to Santa Rosa and give 'em hell, are you?
Mr. Foster murmured. Something like that, Cam didn't want to get into a conversation with the old-timer about the insanity of taking on a conventional army with only 2 guys, one of whom had never seen combat until a few days ago, let alone been trained for it. Mr. Foster stared out the window over the work table. Although the inside of the pane was clean, the outside was covered in dust and cobwebs. He stared out across the pastures, his mind traveling back in time to a place and period of time he'd tried and nearly succeeded to forget. He'd been a young man, full of plans, hopes, and dreams when the draft swept through the Fs, and he'd been called to serve his country in Southeast Asia. The Viet Cong hadn't fought a conventional style war, but a few of America's warfighters at the time were in units allowed to adapt and operate in the same manner. These units were highly successful against the troops from the north, but it came at a terrible price. Mr. Foster's eyes met Cam's, his stare that of a man tired of a life he hadn't chosen.
"You've seen it. I can see it in the lines on your face and in your eyes. Hell! I can tell by the way you walk. But him?"
Mr. Foster stabbed a liver-spotted hand in Darian's direction.
"He hasn't seen it. Not the real thing."
His voice rose, gaining momentum. Cam held the older man's gaze, his face impassive, unreadable. He didn't like the fact the old guy had so accurately articulated his past simply by the manner in which he looked or moved. Mr. Foster broke eye contact with Cam, pivoting on Darren.
"Son, you better be damn sure this is a road you're willing to walk down, 'cause there's no coming back."
Darren shifted his rifle sling slightly. "If I don't do it, I mean, what other guys around here will step up?" Mr. Foster snorted, laughing softly, his shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly.
"If not me, then who? That is indefensible, son."
He sat up straight and ran his hands down his pant legs before looking up at Darren again.
"Is there anything you want me to tell your father if I see him?"
he inquired, scrutinizing Darien as though searching for a sign of hesitancy. He found none, and remembered his own feelings of invincibility when he'd left for Vietnam, decades before. Darien mulled that over for a second and then said, "Tell him I'll try to stop by soon." After leaving the Foster's farm, Darien led Cam on a circuitous route, avoiding most neighborhoods and all the main roads as they moved north toward Santa Rosa. There were times when Darien seemed unsure of either where he was or which way to go. He would mutter under his breath, lament silently, then make a decision. During those moments of indecision, Cam waited patiently and then followed the younger Bayet brother, knowing it didn't really matter as long as they continued north. He was aware they had drifted west and was perfectly okay with that so long as it kept them off the KPA radar. The sun hung low on the tops of the mountains to his left as Cam walked through an empty 50-acre pasture, roughly 200 yards from a white farmhouse situated close to the road they were paralleling. There was no sign anyone was around, but they still took it nice and slow, stopping frequently to search out threats. The positive thing about few, if any, running vehicles was anyone who wanted to close with them would also be on foot, suffering the same restrictions of speed and maneuverability that they did. That obviously wouldn't be the case if they ran afoul a Chinese or KPA unit, but neither man spoke of that. Cam wished he'd spent more time scavenging the APC for any other weapons like mines, more grenades, or shoulder-launch warheads. Being maneuvered on in the open by armored vehicles with troops was bad, but it was much less bad if the person being closed with could strike a death blow. As it stood, Cam and Darien would have no option but to run. As long shadows turned to the murky gray of nightfall, the 2 men transitioned east through more fields. Strangely, there was no livestock in the fields as they crept forward, weapons low but ready to be hefted into action. Cam could only guess that the farmers who owned the beef and milk cattle out this way recognized the risk of leaving the herd out in plain view for people to steal or outright slaughter on the spot. The more he thought about the matter, the more he wondered if the KPA soldiers were the reason for all the missing animals. He'd read history books and was aware that armies of old fed their troops off the land. If a dependable supply line hadn't been established yet, it made sense that the North Korean commanders would need other means by which to feed their troops. Korean barbecue was a real thing, he knew. During one of their many security halts, Darian slid up close to Cam so they could talk in whispers. "The highway isn't too far from here. We're still south of the city, which will be better for getting across the highway," Darian said in a hushed voice. Cam's mind whirled as he stared off into the darkness that blanketed the flat pasture lands. If the place in Santa Rosa was being used to detain prisoners, then he fully expected road checkpoints on either side of the city, as well as on several of the main roads leading in and out from both the east and the west. "We take it nice and slow and stay close. I don't want us losing contact with each other if something jumps off. If we get into anything, listen to what I'm telling you and do it." Darian dipped his chin in understanding. "We aren't fighting anyone unless we're cornered." Cam held up his rifle. "As much as the media wants everyone to believe this rifle is the most dangerous thing ever created by mankind, it's not. Against a few of these Koreans and one of their APCs," Cam shook his head, "they aren't worth much." Darian gave a rare smile in the darkness, showing straight, white teeth that stood out in stark contrast to his tan, bearded face. "What's our plan, then?"